千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we delve deeply into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So greetings once again. Today, I would like to begin on a slightly different note, and this is in part because I was reflecting on the meeting beginning ritual that we went through, where we talk about gathering together in the Tao. So just by coincidence, I saw something that caught my attention on a website. It's a bunch of ideas about success in life. And I was glad to see that the website at least was using the word success in the same way that I've been using it, not restricted to monetary, material success, but success in every aspect of life, which can mean financial success, certainly, but more importantly, it can also mean success emotionally, spiritually, mentally, with your friends, with your family, in terms of your connections and relationships. So for success in life, the website talks about rules, and the very last one was the one that caught my attention. The website offered this idea. It said, if you wish to have success in life, find people who are walking in the same direction as you and walk with them. It occurred to me that that's exactly what we are doing every Sunday. We are gathering together, we are walking in the same direction, we all want the same things, we are all traveling on the Tao, on the path of the Tao. And so for a moment, we get to walk together, which for me is an honor and a privilege. And I am grateful for the opportunity to be able to do that. Then I saw that the webpage ends with a proverb. The proverb goes like this. This ancient proverb says, to go fast, go alone. To go far, go together. Very interesting. So the website says that this is an ancient proverb that is of African in origin. So I instantly connect with that. It is certainly true that when you go alone, you are just by yourself, unencumbered. You can do whatever you want. You can go off in whatever direction you want. You don't need to worry about anyone else but yourself. So you can go fast. But look at these two lines. Going fast does not mean going far. If you want to go far, you have to band together with like-minded individuals, which is exactly what we're doing. So I hope that you draw inspiration from this, just as I have, and that you feel, just as I do, that this fits very well with what we are doing every Sunday. We want to go far. Therefore, we got to stick together. So with that, I want to get us into the Tao Te Ching discussion. And I want to first review the schedule, the plan for today, and also for the weeks to come. Today is September 20th. Our plan is to get into chapter 46 today. We do have some material to finish from chapter 45. So we'll do that. We'll do the last part of it, the paraphrase, and the full circle. Going full circle with the chapter from the end of the chapter back to the beginning for a truly complete understanding. Then, next Sunday, we continue with our discussion of 46, a very interesting chapter. And then after that, we get into 47. And please pay attention to October 11th because we'll be taking a break that day. So that is the plan. Now let's get back into the last part of chapter 45 so we can finish our discussion properly. So chapter 45, a relatively short chapter with only 10 lines. This particular chapter, as you saw, has a lot of concepts. What I call the 5 greats: great perfection, great fullness, great straightness, great skill, great eloquence. And of course, when we began exploring this chapter, we started with a look at the divisions and where the lines can divide themselves into different sections. And after some work, this is what we ended up with. We identified the characters that reiterated from line to line. We used that as a clue to help us identify where the different sections were. And sometimes you can see a clear break just from the repeating lines with a certain number of characters. So for instance, from 1 to 7, they're all 4 characters each, and then 8 and 9 are 3 characters each. And visually, that makes it easy to tell, at least in Mandarin, where the breaks are. We then proceeded with a line-by-line analysis. And last Sunday, we went from the middle of the chapter, which was line 5, all the way to the end, which was line 10. So the line 5 concept is the Great Straightness. This is the third of the 5 greats. And we started with that last time. We talked about the third great straightness, as you see in this slide, and applied to Tao cultivation. It's all about the Tao being the best path. It's the path that's easy to travel. And the analogy or the metaphor that we're using is a road, a mountain road that is winding its way up or down the mountain. So that road has been constructed with the terrain of the mountain in mind, and therefore, traversing up or down the mountain, it's the best path to follow. It's simple to follow. The path is clearly marked. Applied to Tao cultivation, it's like that. The Tao itself, as the path of cultivation, can also seem to wind back and forth, and that's because of human nature. It's following the terrain of human nature, so to speak. So in this example, what I talked about was that imagine that some people trying to be clever are looking to cut through and do the straight path from one position, from one place in the road to another without going back and forth. They may think that this will save them time, but we know from real life that when you veer off the mountain road, try to go uphill or down, you end up with bad results. You end up with no benefits. Most of the time, if you attempt that, you end up having to go back to where you started and continue on the path. It's like that with spiritual cultivation, as we talked about. And I know that this can be abstract. Anytime we talk about shortcuts in spiritual cultivation, people would have some problem with that because we know what shortcuts look like in the physical world, but what do shortcuts look like in spiritual practice? So we used a whole bunch of examples. We went through a bunch of examples to explain what shortcuts could be, how they looked. And one such example was in this slide that you saw. In general, generally speaking, taking shortcuts in spiritual cultivation, shortcuts on the spiritual path, is like taking an original teaching and distorting it to take out the depth and nuance. So you end up with something that is simplified and therefore has more mass appeal, but at the sacrifice of actual meaning. So anytime the distortion ends up feeling like it's something that requires little or no work, the perception of it, that would be like a spiritual shortcut. So in this particular slide, we talked about 顺其自然, which means to follow the nature of all things. This is a very Tao-centric concept. It's talking about how no matter what you do, no matter where you are, you want to be aware of the nature of the event, the environment, the people you deal with, people and things. And you want to make sure that you go in accordance with that and make adjustments as necessary. The image that I showed previously was this rafter in the rapids. So the powerful currents of the rapids are pushing the raft this way and that. The rafter has to work with it, going along in the same direction, certainly, being aware of the nature of the rapids, certainly, but also making adjustments in order to get the most out of the exercise. So that is what the Tao really is. This mindset is expressed in a common saying that I spoke of before that you see in red, right in the middle of this slide. 尽人事，听天命. And I have translated that expression to something that's more English friendly. First, do all that is humanly possible, then listen to the heavenly mandate. So there's a part of it where you have to take the initiative to take the action that you need. A friend of mine likes to tell a joke where a very devout man is constantly praying to God, saying, God, please make me wealthy. I don't ask you for anything. I ask only for this. Make me wealthy. Please, please, please. This prayer went on for days and nothing happens. So the man continues to pray, God, why have you not answered my prayer? I've been praying to you all this time. I just want to be wealthy. Please help, please. And finally, one day, he got an answer from God. God said, listen, you got to work with me. Go buy a lotto ticket. Got to meet me halfway. It expresses in humorous fashion this same idea. God helps those who help themselves. Or in the context of the Tao will come to your aid. Heavenly forces, divine forces will come to your aid if you follow the Tao. First, you have to do the following. You have to invest some effort. So first, do all that is humanly possible. Then, listen to the heavenly mandate. So this is what the Tao actually is, a collaboration between your initiative and your destiny. It goes with the original idea to work with things in accordance to their nature. After it is westernized, sometime back in the 60s, we ended up with something like go with the flow. Go with the flow is actually a shortcut on the original Tao. The original Tao is more active, requiring effort, like the rafter in the rapids, as you see here. It makes it more passive, more like I'm just gonna wait here for something to happen. I'm just gonna go with the flow, propelled by events, and then see where it takes me. That's more passive. It's more like hitting the sand, denying reality. So as you can see, whenever you have an idea that has been twisted from the original to something that requires little to no effort, very likely that is a shortcut. Other examples include let go of your to-do list, just have no goals. The sage has no goals, so why should we have any goals? So anyhow, that is something that I find to be a very interesting difference between East and West. I want to expose everyone to the actual Eastern ideas so that you can take it into consideration, and maybe the possibility of unlearning some harmful or at most useless ideas that we've been exposed to from time to time. Then last time, we also talked about another the great skill. When we talk about great skill in the context of Tao cultivation, it's always about spiritual cultivation in perfecting a virtue. In the slide that I shared before, we went through a bunch of examples where Tao cultivation involves perfecting your mind. So for instance, you start out being too credulous, but as you refine your mind, you can gain the skill of the balanced, healthy skepticism. Initially, you may not be particularly curious, but hopefully the Tao will turn you into someone who is always looking to learn and apply new ideas. You might have started as someone who pointed the finger away from yourself, blaming external factors or other people for misfortunes. Hopefully, in the course of Tao cultivation, you begin to see yourself as the ultimate authority on your own fate, that you are the author of your own destiny, you are the architect of the blueprint of your life. With that power firmly within your grasp, you can make decisions, you can change your life, you can shift things around to do things that you could not before. You can improve every aspect of your life. You have that power. And then there's emotional control. Rather than lashing out in anger and frustration, through Tao cultivation, I want to make sure everyone learns and applies the ideas on mental alchemy or the mind transformation to transform emotions like rage into motivation for action and changes. And the last example there for that particular subcategory was about entitlement. So the gratitude that I was expressing at the beginning of our meeting today comes from the idea, the cultivational practice, that I am entitled to nothing. I'm not entitled to this meeting, having travel companions like yourselves to go the same direction with me, to having an audience. I am entitled to none of it. Therefore, I am grateful to all of it. This, in my opinion, is what's missing in many people who study the Tao in the West. So often, I see them learning a concept, fascinated by the concept, but then they put it aside and they move on to the next topic. They never actually perfect the skill that goes with the concept. That's a shortcut too, because it takes time and effort, it takes work and discipline to extract a skill, incorporate that into your life, and apply it in everyday living. A lot of people don't want to do the work. They just want the mental stimulation of going on to the next fun idea, interesting idea. Well, the result is that their lives don't change very much. After years of study, they're still in the same place that they were before spiritually, whereas the few, hopefully us, who apply even just a few ideas have already progressed light years ahead. So I want that to be everyone in this group. Finally, last time we went through the fifth of the five greats, which is called the Great Eloquence. So here, I pulled in a quote from the I Ching. So the I Ching is typically in the West is often used for, fortune telling, casting the coins and so forth, where it's proven to be extremely accurate, sometimes even accurate to an eerie extent. Now, what is not as well known is that I Ching was actually meant to be a guide to tell you about the patterns in life. When it comes to the Great Eloquence, I Ching has quite a bit to say about that. So the lines that you see here at the top is extracted from the I Ching, 吉人之辞寡，找人之辞多, and it translates to the auspicious person's words are few. The words are rare. The impetuous person's words are many. So the auspicious person has a broader context of the cultivated individual. When someone doesn't talk all that much, that person's words are highly valued and therefore highly regarded. That person is auspicious. The impetuous person, the 造人, 知词多, the words are many, well, that person, the 造人, talks a lot. And when someone talks that much, you already know that their words are of little to no value. Therefore, that person would not be auspicious and would not be highly valued or highly regarded. So this is what the I Ching has to say about that. And in the distant future, I hope to have more of an opportunity to delve deeply into all of the concepts, the life-affirming concepts from the I Ching with everyone. For now, I just want to focus on the fact that the great skill and great eloquence, 大巧 and 大辩, form an overall attitude of humility, which is another way to say true confidence. It's truly confident because when you have the great skills, for real, you don't need to show them off. So there's a common expression in Mandarin at the bottom that you see here, 大智若愚. It is a set phrase, what they call 成语, and it shows up all the time in daily conversation. 大智若愚, great wisdom seems like foolishness. If you were to unpack it, you would find components of great skill and great eloquence. So remember, from the I Ching, 吉人之辞寡, 造人之辞多. I want to, it was particularly important for me to bring that out because it is very common in the West that the I Ching is oftentimes only used for fortune telling. That, in my opinion, is a misuse of a great book. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that this whole idea to talk less and do more goes back a lot further in time, back in time, thousands of years before Lao Tzu. Now, when I talk about, just one more thing about the I Ching before we move on. when I talk about the life patterns that the I Ching describes, the basic idea and how this connects to fortune telling, divination, is that when you fully understand, when you truly understand the patterns that the I Ching is describing to you, when you know most of them, when you are familiar with them, you recognize them. When you see them, you're thinking, this was mentioned in the I Ching. It is part of this particular pattern that I studied. Then imagine what happens to the way you approach life. You already know how the drama is going to play out. You can anticipate, you can plan. To other people, it is as if you know the future. They would then see you as something like a seer or a living oracle. You then begin to understand why the I Ching is so powerful. Those patterns, mastering them is like mastering time, mastering the past, present, and the future. And you can do that without casting coins. So then, when we talked about the fifth of the five grades, we concluded that discussion, and we should therefore put all the five grades together. Now that we have completed our discussion of the five grades, here they are in one slide as a mini summary. We start out with Da Cheng, great perfection. The Tao is the ultimate perfection by definition. Da Cheng is synonymous with the Tao. But because our understanding of it is incomplete, we may not be able to see that. And it's similar with Da Ying, gratefulness. Here we see the Tao as the source of universal creation. It is full of infinite possibilities. But because we don't understand it all that well, we may not be able to see that. Da Zhi, the Great Straightness. The path of the Tao is the best way to cultivate spirituality. But some people think they can do better by trying the side paths, the shortcuts. And again, that's because a lot of us don't really understand the Tao all that well. So you can see the commonality between great straightness with the previous two, great perfection and gratefulness. Then we have great skill. That is, when we have integrated a virtue through long-term cultivation, it becomes a natural part of us. It may seem unskillful to those who are not familiar with the Tao. Same with the last one, great eloquence. The more you understand the Tao, the more you feel inclined to do more and talk less. And to those who are unfamiliar with the Tao, they may think that because you don't talk as much, you seem inarticulate. This is especially true, in my opinion, in the West, because we live in a very talkative culture. We value those who talk fast and seem to dispense a lot of ideas in a very short time, like a machine gun. In the Tao, it's quality, not quantity. So overall, as you can see in this slide, all five grades are about how flawed human perception, human understanding can lead us to the wrong idea, that is, the wrong conception or conclusion about the Tao. So this is actually a very important chapter. It's, in my opinion, underrated. So I'm happy that we have a chance to do it justice. So finally, last time, beyond the five grades, we wrapped up the chapter with a discussion on the last three lines. The last three lines focused on clarity and tranquility. In this slide, you'll see them as the first two characters of line 3, 清净. So we ended on a practical note applying the concepts of these two powerful virtues, clarity and tranquility, to conflict resolution. And we talked about how conflicts usually have a pattern to it, and resolving it can be done in predictable manner in a very straightforward fashion. And there was one more thing that we didn't touch on, and it had to do with lines 8 and 9. And it came in the form of a question. It was brought to my attention that the following question was asked. In some copies of Tao Te Ching, annotated and explained, line 8 and line 9 in this chapter are translated differently. What is the reason for the difference? So first of all, I am so happy with a question like this. It just tells me that people are paying attention and they're being very careful. They're being very complete in their study of the Tao. That's a very good thing. That really makes my day. Now, the reason for the difference, of course, I have for everyone kind of a quick answer, a short answer, and a long answer with additional details. So let me start with the short answer. There are a few subtle variations in the classical Chinese text of the Tao Te Ching. I continue to study and research because my purpose is to have as accurate as humanly possible a translation as I can offer to the world, to the Western reading public. So sometimes I find it necessary to update my translation for that purpose, to keep it accurate. So that's the reason. And now I want to delve into the details and illustrate exactly what the difference is and how it came about, the corrections thereof, etc. So first, let me show line 8 and line 9. As you can see here, movement overcomes cold, stillness overcomes heat. And these come from the original text, 燥胜寒, 静胜热. The middle character is the same. It means to win over, to be victorious over someone or to triumph, translated as overcomes. Then we have 燥, which means to be restless, translated as movement. 寒 means cold. That's an easy one. And then 静, stillness, tranquility, silence, quietness. And then 热, hot, heat. So the translation follows pretty much from the original, from the text, but there's a variant version of 8 and 9. The format is similar, but the characters are shifted, thus changing the meaning slightly. Here's what the other version looks like. Stillness overcomes movement, cold overcomes heat. So look at the text here. 静胜燥. These characters are, well, the middle character is still the same, so it's still overcome. That part doesn't change. The other characters are shifted around. So 静, what was the beginning of line 9, becomes the beginning of line 8, and it still means the same thing, stillness, quietness, tranquility, etc. And then 燥, the restlessness that is translated as movement. And then line 9 is shifted around too. The last part of it is the same, overcoming heat, but the first character, Han, is cold, and that used to be at the end of line 8. So this is actually the version that I had initially translated for Tao Te Ching, annotated and explained. before settling on the version you see today, which is in the top of this slide. Now the question is, why the difference? What is the cause of the difference? So the bottom one here, stillness overcomes movement, cold overcomes heat. This is the way that I learned the Tao Te Ching initially. So this is the version that I initially translated. It is how it appeared in the first edition of Tao Te Ching, Annotated and Explained, my translation. Now, I did not initially question the accuracy of the Chinese text. The reason why is because in the version that I translated, both lines seem to follow a poetic pattern to reinforce the idea of cooling down hot temper with stillness. So these two lines still lead naturally to Qingjing. The poetic structure comes from when you look at stillness and cold, Jing and Han, well, they match. They are similar. They are both manifestations of yin in yin and yang. Then movement and heat, they match because they're both manifestations of yang, the yang energy in yin and yang. Now, after the first edition was published, I noticed that there was another version of these two lines, the version that we're using now. When I noticed that there was a different version, I investigated and I saw that both versions of these two lines were in widespread use. Some Chinese text and commentary use one, some use the other. And there seemed to be no rhyme or reason and I wanted to know what caused the difference between the two. So then what I decided to do was that I investigated older versions of the Tao Te Ching, ancient versions. And I thought that this was a very worthwhile discussion because in the other variation, the version that I initially did not translate, there was also a poetic structure that is intact, except it isn't the matching, it's the opposites. So movement will be the opposite of stillness. Therefore, cold will be the opposite of heat. That makes a lot of sense. Poetically, it's very sound. So in terms of structure, there's no one version better than the other. So it's down to investigating the ancient versions of the Tao Te Ching. So this can lead us to a fascinating discussion on the ancient versions. The text the graphic that you see, this is an actual shot of the very ancient version in the original form back before substantial amounts of linguistic evolution has given us the form of the characters we see today. So what is the very earliest version of the Tao Te Ching? Well, it's the one that was written by Lao Tzu. So we don't have an exact time for when it was written. Approximately, we just pin it down to 2,500 years ago. We don't have a copy of that. The copy is lost to history. If it were to surface, it would be a major archaeological find. It would be like Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this version we don't have, we can only guess at it. We can only see what it probably contained based on the versions that are almost as old as 2,500 years, but not quite. So then there's one version that was unearthed from Guodian. Guodian is a tomb, a series of tombs, and in ancient times, when a notable person, perhaps a noble, perhaps royalty, when that person was buried, when that person had died and was buried in a tomb, They weren't mummified like the ancient Egyptian practice, but they would certainly bring with them, they would be buried along with the items that they treasured while alive. And for some, treasured items included their copy of the Tao Te Ching. So this was the exciting part, that when you unearth these tombs and you see these ancient fragments for Guodian, for the tomb at Guodian, the ancient fragments were on bamboo slips, and they dated back 2,300 years ago. There was another version, also from a tomb, at around that time. And this was Ma Wangdui. This is the name of another tomb. This was an earlier discovery. The Guodian tomb was discovered in the 1990s, in the early 1990s. Ma Wangdui was discovered earlier than that. And at the time, it was the earliest version of the Tao Te Ching known to history, known to archaeologists. The version inside the tomb at Ma Wangdui was written on silk. Many of the characters are incomplete, which makes it resemble someone trying to write down based on memory what the Tao Te Ching contained. And it dates back roughly 2,200 years ago. There was a version after that at around the same time as Ma Wangdui, the one that was unearthed and dated from the tomb, and that's He Shang Gong. This time, it's not so much connected to a tomb as it was connected to a sage by the name of He Shang Gong. This is sort of a sage by the river type of thing. That's the title. That's not a proper name. That's the title of a particular sage who studied and taught the Tao 2,200 years ago. So there's a version associated with that as well. And finally, Wang Bi. Wang Bi is a young scholar who, in his early 20s, looked at all the versions of the Tao Te Ching prior to his time, which is roughly 1775 years ago. He looked at all of those different versions. He combined and unified them into a standard version, which was then in use from that point on. So that is the version, the Wang Bi version of the Tao Te Ching, that has the greatest effect on the various dynasties that came and went for the last 1,000 years. It is the version that I standardized on for my own translation. So here's the interesting thing. For all of these ancient versions, they all contained the version of the passage, line 8 and line 9, that you are looking at now, that is currently available now in the current printed version of my translation. That being the case, I realized that this was probably the correct one, even though both variants were in widespread use. The one that I was looking at from ancient times was much more likely to be the one that Lao Tzu intended. There was likely a change within the last 17 centuries that ended up with a slightly distorted version. In all likelihood, it might be due to times of warfare and chaos that made it necessary to transmit the teachings of the Tao Te Ching from one person to another through memorization. That is, after warfare, chaos, and strife, you may be able to settle down somewhere, live a normal life, then you would try to write down what you had committed to memory from before, what you can recall of the Tao Te Ching, in order to teach it to the next generation. Somewhere along the line, imperfect human memory might have made mistakes. So this is the reason why I think you would agree I had to switch back to the version that was more likely to be the original version. Now, Wang Bi, the last note on this young scholar, Wang Bi, he passed away shortly after he completed his work while still in his 20s. He was quite the prodigy as a scholar. Wang Bi, from 1775 years ago, he most likely had access to even older versions and many more versions of the Tao Te Ching than we have access to, additional versions that are also lost to history. So I trust that he had good reasons in his choice to create the consolidated and standardized version. That's the reason why I standardize on it. So let's go back to that standard version. Movement overcomes cold. Stillness overcomes heat. I updated the manuscript. I standardized on the version you see today across my presentations on Sundays, like today, and on the website. Now, I want you to notice that Lao Tzu is really expressing the yin and yang in two levels, where he says movement overcomes cold. Movement is yang, cold is yin. Then stillness overcomes heat. Stillness is yin, heat is yang. And line 8 and line 9 manifest as yin and yang as well. Line 8 moves toward cold, yin. Line 9 moves toward heat, yang. Indeed, in the ancient historical commentaries, sages, scholars have often connected these concepts to seasons. They explain them in terms of seasons. This includes the scholar Wang Bi, who consolidated and unified the variant versions of the Tao Te Ching before him, and also He Shanggong, the sage who lived by the river. He also commented on the same lines, and he also linked them to the changing of seasons. So let me explain the way they explained it with the following table. There's the character linked to a season. So first, the easiest way is to look at line 8 and start from the back. Cold, I think it would make sense to you to automatically connect that to winter. So where it says movement overcomes cold, that's talking about how winter is behind us, spring is coming, and therefore all the living things become restless. They begin to move. They begin their activities. So spring comes displacing winter. That's how much sense this makes. And it's a context that I know would escape most people unless they have proper guidance. Then take a look at line 9. And again, it's easier to work from the back. Heat, you would, of course, automatically associate that with summertime. It's a natural correspondence to associate hot, heat, heated, hotness with summertime. Stillness overcomes heat. Now you see how the logic goes. It is easy to see that when fall comes, when autumn comes, it displaces the heat of the summer. And there you have it. Even the concept of cycles, endlessly repeating cycles, is embedded in the original writing of the Tao Te Ching. There are levels of meaning that I never previously touched on. I am so happy we have this opportunity today. Please note that the large print and hardcover editions of Tao Te Ching, Annotated and Explained, the publisher, the book itself went through a change of publisher. It went from Skylab Paths to a larger publishing company, Turner Publishing. And the new publisher used the original, the initial translation manuscript as the basis for the large print and hardcover editions. So this is something that I'm going to need to work with them on correcting. But in the meantime, I would urge everyone to always look for the real standard in our presentations and also on the web. So my fellow travel companions, we have completed our discussion of every single line of Tao Te Ching 45 and then some. It is therefore time for us to do a paraphrase to express the original using modern language. The translation doesn't have to be precise, but we want to do our very best to ensure that the meaning is accurate. The first section of 45 is talking about great perfection and great fullness. So here is the paraphrase that I would like to offer. We may think there is something missing in the great perfection of the Tao, but that is due to a gap in our understanding. Regardless of our ability to understand it, the Tao is always functioning without fail. It is an infinite field full of possibilities. And yet, it seems like an empty void. Regardless of our perception of it, the Tao continues to be the source of universal creation. We then move on to the second section, which is all about the final three greats: great straightness, great skill, and great eloquence. And here's the paraphrase I would like to offer for that. Because of our incomplete understanding, the straightforward teachings of the Tao may seem distorted. Similarly, the greatest skills may appear unskillful, and the greatest eloquence, saying the least but conveying the most, may not seem very articulate. And looking at this and reflecting upon the world, we can see how accurate Lao Tzu was in his observations. So often, this is true when we talk to other people, when we interact with other people. So often, it seems as if the plain truth is not easily accepted. Why? Because the plain truth, to many people, seems too simple. And to them, a virtuoso performance looks too easy. And then perhaps also to them, a very thoughtful person seems too quiet. And as I said, I think we have this problem being multiplied in the West due to how talkative our culture is. Now, continuing on to the third and final section, we have the conclusion here based on what we have just discussed about movement, overcoming cold, stillness, overcoming heat. So you can think of those, as we just pointed out, as spring comes, chasing away winter, or autumn is coming, displacing summer. In any case, here is the paraphrase I want to offer everyone. Cultivation is like physical movements in that one must be active to generate energy, but too much of it can overheat oneself mentally and emotionally. Thus, we must also utilize the principles of clarity and tranquility, not just for ourselves, but also for the world. So there's the paraphrase for 45. The last reference there for the world appears in line 10 of the original, 清净为天下正, talking about clarity and tranquility, using them as the standard for the world. So that concludes the paraphrase segment. We have just one more thing to talk about, and that is the full circle. How do we go to the very end of this chapter and connect it back to the beginning to fully get the essence of the Tao? Here's how I would do it. In the last lines of 45, Lao Tzu talks about 清净, which can be translated as clear quietness or clear tranquility, either way. And to the right-hand side, to the lower right-hand corner, you're going to see 清净as the first two characters there. That's what we're talking about. When we connect back to the beginning, we see that we should regard 清净also as a manifestation of the great perfection. So we start out at the very beginning with 大成, which was great perfection. We begin the last line with 清净. So linking back, establishing the connection between the two, we can see how true this is from experience. 清, clarity. We know from experience that with spiritual clarity, we can see the world through the Tao much more easily. We can see, perceive, become aware of more, not just what's in front of us, but also all around us. Then, 静, our experience from life is that only when we quiet down the mental chatter within, the inner noise, the stray thoughts, the out of control monkey chatter in the brain, only when we quiet that down are we able to connect with the Tao. In fact, that is the basis of meditation, quieting down the mind to connect with the Tao. So there's a little bit more to this. We see how the last line connects to the first line. We also want to see how the great perfection of the Tao links back to Qingjing. And that would form a full circle. So our experience plus the ending of this chapter, they both point to the importance of Qingjing, clarity and tranquility. It is indeed very important. In fact, it is so important that 12 centuries after the time of Lao Tzu, an anonymous sage wrote a classic called Qingjing Jing, which is the classic of clarity and tranquility. You can also call it the Clarity and Tranquility Sutra or classic. So this classic was written in the Tang Dynasty, which was certainly the apex of ancient Chinese civilization. This classic expands on the concepts of clarity and tranquility. It also integrates with concepts from Buddhism. So it is especially important because of that. So 1200 years after the time of Lao Tzu, Buddhism had become very widespread and well accepted in ancient China. People practiced them together. They did not see a conflict between the two. They saw the concepts as reinforcing one another. Here, you see the writing of Qingjing Jing in Chinese along with Buddhist prayer beads, which has Qingjing. It's one of them. This underlines the connection between the two. It is such a remarkable classic. I think, as you would expect, I am working on a translation of that, and I will be publishing it in the near future. So this lead to Qingjing and Qingjing Jing is just one example out of many of how the full circle examination of a chapter can provide additional insights that may not be known at all to most readers of the Tao Te Ching. With the conclusion of the full circle, we have now 100% completed our discussion of 45. So summary, applying the Tao Te Ching. First, I want to reiterate the 5 greats that you saw in the beginning of our meeting today. There's Da Cheng, great perfection. Remember that the Tao is the ultimate imperfection, but human beings don't necessarily see that because we're human beings. Same with Da Ying, great fullness. The Tao, being the ultimate source, is full of possibilities, but we may not understand that. Da Zhi, great straightness. The path of the Tao is easy to walk. It's well marked. It's the best way. But people may think they can do better by taking the side paths. And great skill, the great integrated virtue or skill that's a part of you, may seem unskillful to those who are unfamiliar with the Tao. And this is when we look at the people who are very well accomplished, very skillful, and we say, wow, they make it look so easy. That's the greatest skill of all, to make it look effortless. And lastly, we have great eloquence, which is to say, those who know the most, maybe those who talk the least. And we should aspire to that, especially, as I say, in this very talkative culture of ours. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.